Hello everybody and welcome to Sit Down with Sancho's. This is going to be a series where I interview some of the most inspiring activists in sustainable fashion, sustainable business and sustainable activism. And I'm doing this because I am so curious as to what motivates people, how they really build on their work, how they create new work, and just to get the opportunity to talk with some people. So yeah, today we're going to start with Safia Minney. So Safia is the founder of People Tree. She is a world-leading social entrepreneur. Her journey started with People Tree Japan, where she identified that she needed to build a unique supply chain firsthand in fashion in order to guarantee that it is sustainable. This became the template for fair trade fashion manufacturing that dozens and dozens of brands use now. She is the managing director of Pozu. She's a speaker, the author of Slave to Fashion, Slow Fashion and Naked Fashion, and an ambassador in the True Cost film. She has now founded a new organisation called Real Sustainable, which we'll hear about today. And she also produces a ethical agenda podcast where she interviews authors, business leaders and community activists, and really just inspires us all to live our most sustainable lives. So I'm very excited to be interviewing with Safia today, and if you follow along, you'll hear everything that she's got to say about how customers can identify if a business is behaving responsibly, what the current context of sustainable fashion is, and what the future of sustainable fashion would be. So please continue watching, and let's go into the interview.
Is that okay?
Yeah, it's perfect. Yeah, thank you so much.
Rather than I mean, it could be a picture of working with producers, but I think maybe that's okay.
Could you tell us a bit? Yeah, if that's okay. Could you tell us a bit about just a bit about your experience growing up?
Okay, right. Well, I grew up in the Home Counties, and my father was Indian Mauritian. My mother was Swiss. He was a scientist. He unfortunately he died of stomach cancer when I was 7. I was the eldest of 3. So I have extremely fond memories of him doing magic tricks and turning wine into water and green into purple at birthday parties and smoke coming out and and he'd wear his silken star and moon gown down to perform. So I mean, really quite wonderful. But he was I think he was very cautious about consumerism. He didn't allow us to watch commercial TV at all. My mother was very much she, after his death, she threw herself into voluntary social work, and so we come from quite a line of pro-social people. My grandfather was he ran a social project, but he was also a publisher and then became a politician. So I guess campaigning has always been in the blood, as has kind of community and social work. So I guess that's my upbringing. My mom reminded me yesterday, we've been doing exercise classes every morning at 8 o'clock on Alexa, just to kind of keep, because she's been in now for 6 weeks and is 86 years old. She reminded me that my first fundraising was when I was 9, and I made her make, actually, if I'm honest, marmalade, but I did grow about 100 geranium shoots, little plants, pot plants, and the money that was raised went to buying a television for a Ugandan family, because she was helping to resettle families as they came over after Idi Amin threw loads of families out. So I guess working with people in a new community, people kind of fleeing from their homes, leaving with only a couple of suitcases, and kind of thinking about that from quite an early age, I guess has been part of my growing up. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, that sounds like the equipment of becoming an activist in the future, like getting tons of practice from such an early age. What led you to fashion in particular?
Gosh, I mean, I've always had a love of craft and textiles. So my grandmother, alongside being a social worker, had been an embroidery designer but couldn't get work as an embroidery designer, and And when I went to work in publishing in London at 17, my salary was tiny, so I was, you know, in and out of secondhand shops, and I think, you know, Carnaby Street in the early 80s, next to all of those luxury stores that would kind of hand their unsold items as well as, you know, secondhand products. You know, it was a fantastic opportunity to, you know, to trawl through and really understand about fabric and textile. So I think, you know, it was, I think it was more coming at it from a perspective of, you know, how could fashion and craft be a tool for international development? How could it put food on the table for the most vulnerable people? How could it be an opportunity to create a sustained livelihood, which would mean that there would be self-determination in a community, whether they be, you know, farming organic cotton or hand weaving fabrics that would then be turned into, you know, dresses and skirts and blouses, or hand knitting, hand embroidery, like my grandmother. Um, so I think it was more, you know, fashion as a tool for change. I'm not, you know, I'm not a trained designer, even though I headed up the design for the Japanese people tree and the UK people tree design teams. But I think, you know, very much it was about, you know, this opportunity of creating an escape from poverty and empowerment.
Sure. So would you say that the core link between sustainable fashion and development is how it creates opportunities for people to engage with fair work?
Yes, I mean, totally. I mean, in the early 90s, I think realizing that most streetwear products and denim were produced in, you know, highly exploitative sweatshops, and really didn't pay people enough to eat, let alone live a dignified life. Yeah, I think fair trade for me speaks, and I've worked very closely to develop some of the fair trade standards, particularly the one on environment, but, you know, really kind of breathing practice into, you know, what does gender equality look like, you know, what does capacity building look like, you know, how do you partner in terms of transparency? I mean, all of those things, you know, you can have as standards, but it's only when you actually put them into business practice, and start developing, you know, processes for them and understanding how the business model and the product needs to change in order to be able to deliver them, that, you know, you really start understanding the power of them.
So could you speak a bit more to that? How would you use the process to empower the workers?
Well, so let me give you an example. So um, I think very often much of the kind of standards that we use tend to be, you know, are and naturally, you know, we're here in the first world. We, you know, we come from a position of relative privilege. So it's very easy for us to bring our value systems when we think of providing work in a village, for example. And, you know, over the you know, 2 decades of running the social review process for People Tree, what we came to understand is that our value systems were slightly different. So many of the producers, you know, they were obviously very aware of the risk around child labour, of decent working conditions. Um, but for example, you know, they wanted, you know, very regular orders and the continuation of those regular orders much more, for example, than they would have wanted, let's say, you know, a new special provision for a particular type of facility as part of the handicraft unit. So, you know, again, it's really, you know, and we would do this with anonymous voting, so that people would have a voice without having to necessarily say, well, actually, I don't agree with my manager's position. So it very much took into account that, you know, sometimes women who are, you know, illiterate might be shy of voicing, you know, a complaint or having discussions. And what we found was this process really gave voice to women. I mean, women would hold their managers accountable. You know, they would eventually become confident enough to argue a particular case, and would come up with great solutions themselves, whether it was about, you know, reducing fabric waste, or you know, how they might start production at a different time. But what was clear was that they wanted to be part of a much bigger discussion which was about, you know, their livelihoods and how they provide in the future for their children. So I think, you know, it's that process, isn't it, of, you know, looking at multi-stakeholder
Yeah.
engagement, and really not presuming that you're asking the right questions, but really thinking about what the questions might be, and then, you know, putting it out to the different parties to see, you know, how you come up with a plan.
Sure. I mean, as someone who, you know, has followed People Tree for a while, I think it's always been clear how detailed and thoughtful the work of, you know, the People Tree is. I'm sure other organisations you've worked with in really empowering the handicraft worker, the maker. Ethical fashion comes under such wide and broad terms. How much of it would you say is created within that context? And I mean, is that the same as having a, you know, a brand that might rely on a much bigger manufacturer to do that itself, or using a certifying body or an auditor to do similar work?
Well, I think it's a really good question. You know, we're having lots of discussions at the moment, aren't we, with COVID and the fallout and this humanitarian crisis that's unraveling before our eyes, about how, you know, we should be happy that brands are not cancelling orders. And yet, you know, surely it's just decency that brands who have, you know, pre-booked fabrics and you know, and ordered product, that they would pay for them, whatever stage of production that they're at. You know, to leave finished product in factories and say that you don't want to buy them, or you want a 30% discount to receive them, when you've profited from their labor for the last 30 years, is an absolute outrage. So I think the conversation really needs to change, doesn't it? And in the same, by the same token, you know, we've celebrated businesses that are acting ethically, that are paying a minimum wage, when really we should be paying them a living wage, when we should be looking at, you know, capacity building. And I think, I mean, it's a very, very difficult question, isn't it? I mean, Calcutta, I think for consumers, we should be, I hate the word consumers, if we're buying clothes and we're buying them new, we should be looking for the World Fair Trade Organization mark. We should be looking for the GOTS, the Global Organic Textile Standards mark. You know, some companies that have, you know, that are a B Corp, you know, are actually making provision to think about their suppliers really well, and looking at zero carbon, and then taking a much more transparent approach in how they manage their businesses. But I think, you know, really what we need to be doing is, you know, reinventing fashion, reinventing production. We need to say, right, well, if we've got, you know, if we look at Kate Raworth's donut economics, and we've got a limited, finite amount of resources on the planet, and yet we have to feed 7.7 billion people, what does fashion have to look like in order to do that, as opposed to, let's just make the current fashion system that is using resources, you know, nearly 2 planets or more every year. You know, how do we actually redesign the fashion system? And I think that will come. You know, we had Kate Fletcher's lovely Earth Logic, where she looked at, you know, yes, we do need to reduce fashion production by about 75%. So if we've got 25% of fashion left, then the question should be, how can we make that 25% truly feed the number of workers that we currently feed from the fashion system? And I'm really sorry to kind of boil it down to, you know, putting food on the table, but that's what we're talking about here, because that's the issue at the moment in the majority world. People are going hungry because they don't have work and they don't have savings, and they've basically been exploited by the neoliberal system for the last 3 or 4 decades. Bit of a rant, sorry.
No, I'm just sat here, you know, trying to kind of comprehend the magnitude of the situation. And so I think there's 75 million people currently relying on the fashion industry to, you know, earn a living and put food on the table. And if they are going to cut their production by 75%, then their incomes are going to have to rise quite significantly in order to, be able to sustain their employment. And do you have in your mind a sense of how that might look, what the future of fashion might look like? I'm sure you've spent a lot of time thinking about it.
Well, yes, I mean, I remember with People Tree, we would do, the FOB price breakdown. So we would look at the price of the product, and we would say, okay, well, what's the price of the what's the cost here of the material used? That would include the accessories like natural buttons, and the threads and fabrics and zippers, etc., etc. And then we would look at the labour component, and then we would look at the profit for the fair trade group. And I think what we need to do is we need to take that FOB price, and we need to say that fast fashion has a labour component of 5 or 6%. How do we get the labour component of that new fashion item up to 30%, for example?
Okay.
And that will come through much more value addition in the fibre growing, it's harvesting, also through the process of creating the fabric, which could be through hand labour methods of hand weaving, for example. There are 10 million hand weavers in India and Bangladesh. The reason why they can't earn a decent wage doing what they do is because they don't have that connection with buyers that will give them those design inputs and give them that commitment for long-term order. We could add value through hand knitting, hand embroidery, etc., etc. So whilst my approach, and the approach that I discussed in Slow Fashion, was very much about taking craft and mainstreaming craft, not because I'm a romantic Luddite or whatever, but because that is the way to really ensure that we could create livelihoods in rural areas where people want to live, and they can support themselves. And one of the biggest problems at the moment is that garment factory workers, they have no garden, they live in a slum. There's absolutely no way of being able to sustain themselves whatsoever. But if you do look at some village fair trade based producer groups, they have an ability to create a local economy, to grow their own food at the same time as making products for export. And I think with this, of course, there are lots of different things that need to be experimented with, including south to south trade. So we would expect organic cotton, for example. It's a cash crop, and it rotates with green ground, with banana growing. There might be vegetables growing between the cotton. So there's an opportunity there to really create resilience and local, a stronger local economy at the same time as having an offer, a cash crop, if you like, that could be exported in organic cotton.
Sure. If you can just come back to the FOB model a second, because I think one thing that I wanted to talk about was how consumers, in the face of greenwashing and in the face of some very large retailers moving into the sustainable space without necessarily changing their models, is there a way that consumers can break down very simply what their expectations from those retailers would be, so that greenwashing wasn't so easily achievable? For example, I thought, as you were saying, you can increase the price earned by the producer from 5% to 30%. Do you think that would be a model in which companies can start demanding?
I think it's really difficult for somebody who's buying a new item to at this point to ask and expect that of a brand. But I think there are many things that we can expect for brands. There should be a modern slavery report on the website of any brand that has an annual turnover of 36 million or more. We can also write to brands and we can ask them, have they honoured their orders and their commitment to suppliers in the majority world now. I think through Common Objective or many other directories of ethical fashion brands and sustainable and fair trade fashion brands, including World Fair Trade Organization, we can hunt out the best fashion brands if we're buying new.
Mm.
I think at this point it's quite difficult. I think what we have done through COVID is we've understood the need for a new economy. We've understood that everything is changing, that we're moving from the old paradigm to the new paradigm, and a lot of frankly the nonsense around this untransparent system, this race to the bottom, which is totally unsustainable.
So what should the average person do to make sure we're able to see a sustainable economy in the future?
Good question. What can we do as individuals? Well, I think the first thing is to be kind with yourself. We're going through a period of incredible learning right now. Right now, I think with the COVID thing, it's like a massive, great workshop, for everyone on the planet. And if we're not struggling to eat, then we have this fantastic opportunity to learn. So, read up about the Green New Deal. Read up about the just transition. Sign up, get involved with what's happening with transition towns or with your local XR group. Get involved with welfare trade organisation and what they're doing, and lovely shops like Sancho's, because I think there is just so much to learn about how the world could be. There are some fantastic books out there as well that I'd love to recommend. I love Rob Hopkins' What If. I mentioned Kate Raworth's book Donut Economics. So if you're a business person, I think it's a fantastic book, or you're deeply interested in sustainability. So I think this is the time to really look at where your energies and your value systems sit, what really resonates with you, and then just go for it. We can't. I mean, I get up in the morning and I have a sign next to my bedroom, next to my bedroom door as I go into the office, and it says put on your climate glasses. Sorry, I'm going to say I've said it all wrong. Sorry. How do I keep my climate emergency glasses on without going bonkers? And that's partly because it's difficult to operate in a state of the sense of emergency that we need to feel every day, unless you're actually doing that through action. So I think many of us find it a really difficult balance. So how do we hold that sense of urgency and what comes with it, fear and sometimes anxiety, together with how can we push that into change? And I think there are so many ways now that we can do that. And this COVID struggle of lockdown and suffering for millions, it is really an opportunity and a must for all of us to rethink how we live. I find it deeply distressing when I hear that people are thinking of coming out of lockdown and just kind of going on some kind of consumeristic spree. That isn't what it's about. It's about really rethinking the important and the simple basic things in life, and I think that's what lockdown has given many of us a chance to really mark in our personal lives.
Yeah.
Don't you?
I don't know. I guess I have to second what you said. I think you said a lot for people to start with, right? I really admire in you that you have such a kind of knowledge, research and information based approach to like climate activism. I think that's fantastic. I think that I personally sometimes struggle to really seek out and absorb lots of new information, and I imagine some people watching might feel the same. So I suppose what I would say to them is, I think I was watching an interview with David Attenborough like a few days ago, and he said just waste less, don't waste things, don't waste water, don't waste energy, don't waste clothes, don't waste food, don't waste travel. And I thought, yeah, that's a really easy thing to remember, a simple thing to remember. So yeah, for anyone who has to build up their reading list, they can just start with a bit less, I guess.
That's a lovely idea, and it also promotes a sense of gratitude, and it is that's so essential for the new paradigm that we're moving into.
Absolutely. So I do have some questions from our followers for you. I've picked out 2. Let's just get them up. Everyone's very excited. So, okay, so the first one is from Megan, and she says, what would you recommend studying if you want to go into the sustainable fashion realm?
Gosh, that's a really difficult question. I think we need to be really studying fashion in a much more technical way, because that gives us the skills to really understand how we can improve the livelihood component, as we discussed earlier. So I would say the kind of the technical fashion side is really important to study. But I think, you know, if you're wanting, if you're really wanting to do sustainability, you might be, I mean, some would argue that fashion is going to be more of a service economy as we move forward. It's not going to be just about, you know, selling new stuff. So it will be a very different approach. So I wonder actually whether, you know, the sustainable management program that's running at Cambridge, for example, is not a great thing to study. I think it's a 9 or a 12-week program. So I think that could be really, really valuable. So I think, you know, rather than being really narrow about, you know, fashion and fashion marketing, you know, everything is changing. You know, everything is up in the air. It's all falling down. You know, it really is about, you know, being able to take a much broader view, but also, you know, understand some of the kind of very detailed nitty gritty, which is about reducing impact on the environment, as you said, but also how to increase the opportunities for livelihood within a product.
Yeah, so many of the problems need technical solutions.
I think they do. I think they really do. And, you know, we've got zero waste pattern cutting these days. We've got, you know, rather too little skills. I know that Common Objective have some really interesting webinars, for example, that they run. So again, that might be a really good resource to have a look at.
Sure. Okay, so moving on to Anna's question. Anna asked, where is your absolute favourite place to shop? And you don't have to say Sancho's, just assuming that he knows.
My favourite place to shop, if I'm brutally honest, is a boot fair or a flea market, or, you know, it's out. You know, my mum lives in Yorkshire. You know, it's you know, out there looking through people's, you know, stuff, you know, finding these vintage textiles that, you know, I would use and reference in People Tree collections back in the day. That's got to be my favourite.
Rock and roll, a very rock and roll answer. And the final question is from My Fair Ladle, and she asks, something we've been talking about quite a lot actually, is do you think positive change will come in fashion will emerge from the COVID-19 situation we're currently experiencing?
I think if the slowdown is understood to be something that we respond to in terms of turning economics on its head. I mean, I don't know how it is for the audience that are listening, but when I studied economics, I thought it was a load of bullshit, because it didn't answer the obvious questions, which is that you cannot have finite growth. It doesn't add up. Economics, if you don't pay for natural resource, if you don't have human rights laws that are enforced, and are able to exploit people, you know, clearly that doesn't add up. So we've had an economic system that we've called the free market that is not a free market. I mean, it's just basically, it's about, you know, it's about using power as a blunt instrument to basically, you know, clobber people, you know. And what have we, you know, I mean, the earth will survive. There's no problem at all with the earth here. It's just that humanity will collapse. I mean, that's the issue, isn't it? But I think, you know, we need to really rethink the sense of what we've learned here, that we are an interconnected world, that we need I mean, I hate the word. I remember it being used in Japan about 20 years ago, but global, you know. So we're thinking that a systems change approach, we're looking at things in a macro way. We're saying, okay, how do we manage to feed everyone? What does fair resource allocation look like, you know, for you know, all of us 7.7 billion people in the world, and how do we make it work? in a way that truly feeds us all. And so I think that's the question. And can we use fashion as a tool for development? Can we use fashion as a tool to educate people as to how they need to live sustainably, and how they need to really, learn to reappreciate the really important things in life, whether it's, the piece of clothing that they buy, or their relationship with the person that made it, or their relationship, in fact, with a person that they might have borrowed it from, or received it from as a hand-me-down. But I do, I think a lot of great things possibly will come out of this, if we allow the new economy to emerge and we really see what this is as being, a huge workshop. We're shifting from old paradigm to new paradigm. Nothing will be the same again. And if it feels like it's the same again, you just have to pinch yourself, because everything is changing.
Well, on that note, that optimistic note, I just got to say thank you so much for sitting down with me and having this conversation. You are an incredible inspiration, and I feel like, I learn so much. Every kind of sentence you kind of share is something that I'd love to sit down and just research and understand in more depth. So thank you so much for taking the time. Yeah, you're awesome.
Thank you so much, Kalkatan, and
Okay.
thank you so much for bringing me to your lovely audience. Yeah. And everyone, stay safe, stay well, and be lovingly kind to yourself and others. Bye-bye.
Bye. That was Safia Minney, the founder of People Tree, author of Slave to Fashion, Slow Fashion and Naked Fashion, and Real Sustainability founder. You can catch her on Real Sustainability's website, where you can sign up to future courses. She's a speaker, she's a coach, she consults in executive leadership for sustainable businesses, and you can also listen to her at the Ethical Agenda podcast. So have a great day, guys. I hope that you learnt lots in this conversation, and you follow us either wherever you find this video, so that you can hear our next interview as well.